The scent of charcoal smoke curled gently through the warm July air as Eleanor arranged the cutlery on the long wooden picnic table. Her hands moved with practiced ease, but her mind was elsewhere, unsettled. She had always loved hosting family cookouts, but this one felt different. Office. Like there was something just beneath the surface, waiting to rot. She was 67, with soft silver gray hair tied back in a bun, and a quiet grace that had only deepened with age. For over 4 decades, she had built a life around her family, her son David, her husband Gerald, and now her soon-to-be daughter-in-law Michelle. The engagement had been announced 2 months ago, and this cookout was meant to bring both families closer before the fall wedding. But ever since Michelle's aunt Lorraine confirmed she'd be flying in from Denver to attend, Eleanor had felt an invisible thread pull tighter across her chest. She'd never met Lorraine in person, only heard about her in passing. Michelle described her as the fun aunt, a glamorous divorcee in her early 50s, who traveled for work and had never really settled down. The kind of woman who drew attention when she entered a room. Eleanor hadn't thought much of her, not until Gerald's expression shifted ever so slightly the first time Lorraine's name came up. It wasn't dramatic, just a pause, a second too long between sips of wine. But Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. That memory returned to her now as she placed a bowl of potato salad down on the table, smoothing the serving spoon as if it would calm the unease inside her. "Mom, need anything else?" David called out from the grill. She turned to smile. "No, sweetheart. Just waiting for your fiancé's side to arrive." David grinned. Lorraine texted, "They just pulled up." Eleanor nodded, watching as a sleek black car rolled down the gravel driveway. Michelle stepped out first, radiant and sweet as ever, followed by her parents. Then Lorraine emerged, tall, poised, stunning, even in casual linen. Oversized sunglasses masked her eyes, but Eleanor felt the scrutiny behind them, the way she paused at the edge of the yard and scanned the space before walking toward the group, not unlike someone returning to familiar territory or inspecting it. She hugged Michelle's parents warmly, then turned to Eleanor and Gerald. "So good to finally meet you." Lorraine's voice was bright, but her hug was brief, a formality. "Welcome," Eleanor said, forcing a polite smile. "You must be tired from the flight." "Not at all. I always make time for family," Lorraine said smoothly. Her hand rested lightly on Gerald's arm, just for a moment too long. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Gerald gave a stiff chuckle and pulled back. "Let's get everyone seated," Eleanor said quickly. "David's burgers are going to be famous if we don't dig in soon." As everyone gathered around the table, Eleanor kept her eyes on Lorraine. She laughed easily, charmed Michelle's father, complimented the decor, but there was something hollow in her cheer, something theatrical. Eleanor sat next to Gerald, who barely touched his plate. His eyes drifted toward Lorraine too often, and each time, he looked away a heartbeat too late. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Gerald was just being friendly. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. But then came dessert. Eleanor rose to bring out the homemade peach cobbler, and as she turned from the kitchen window, her gaze caught something through the glass. Lorraine had pulled Gerald aside near the oak tree. They stood close, too close. Her hand was on his chest. His head was tilted down, listening to something intently. The cobbler shook slightly in Eleanor's hands. She blinked once, slowly. When she opened her eyes again, they had stepped apart. Gerald looked toward the house, his jaw tight. Lorraine walked back to the group, smiling as if nothing had happened. Eleanor placed the dessert down with gentle precision. Her hand trembled only slightly as she sliced into the golden crust. "I hope you all saved room," she said, forcing her voice steady. Lorraine raised her fork. "I've heard you're the queen of cobbler." Eleanor met her gaze. "I am," she said, "and I always know when something's gone sour." Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Gerald in the same bed they'd shared for 43 years, staring at the ceiling while the fan above clicked rhythmically, like a distant metronome counting down to something she didn't want to face. Gerald's breathing was even, too even, as if rehearsed. Her mind kept circling back to the image. Lorraine's fingers resting on Gerald's chest, the hush of that conversation under the oak tree, and the way he'd stiffened when she returned with dessert, as if afraid she'd seen more than she should. Eleanor turned toward the window, her back to him. Her body curled like a shell, and she listened to every small sound in the dark, the silence louder than anything. By morning, she had made up her mind. She wouldn't accuse. Not yet. But she would watch. Closely. The next few days were filled with the usual post-event lull. Thank you texts, leftover containers returned, photos shared in family group chats. Gerald acted as if nothing had happened. If anything, he was more attentive. He brought Eleanor her tea without her asking. He rubbed her shoulders as she cooked. He even picked up a book she had mentioned once in passing and left it by her reading chair. But it didn't feel like affection. It felt like a cover-up. By Thursday, Eleanor noticed something else. Gerald had started taking long afternoon walks again. He claimed he needed to stretch his legs and clear his head, which wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. But what struck Eleanor was how he never took his phone with him, just his watch and keys. And he always returned in better spirits than when he left. She waited until the third walk before following him. She felt absurd at first, sneaking through the neighborhood like a suspicious teenager, but her gut had never betrayed her. It hadn't in the early days of their marriage when she suspected he was overworking to avoid her grief after her miscarriage. And it wasn't now. She followed him at a distance, trailing behind hedges and parked cars. He turned down an alley 2 blocks over, one that led to a quiet little cafe behind the community library. Eleanor stayed back, ducking behind a brick wall just in time to see him take a seat in the far corner of the patio. He checked his watch, then looked up. Lorraine appeared seconds later, sunglasses perched on her head, hair swept up, lips glossed. She walked straight to the table without hesitation. Eleanor couldn't hear what they said, but she didn't need to. The way Lorraine leaned forward, how she touched Gerald's wrist as she laughed, and most damning of all, the moment Gerald looked down at her hand and smiled like a man decades younger. It told her everything. Eleanor backed away slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, tears prickling her eyes but never falling. She walked home in a daze, feeling every year of her age settle into her bones. At home, she sat down in the living room, still in her sun hat and sweater. She stared at the wedding invitation on the mantel. David and Michelle, September 28th. Beneath it, a small photo of Gerald and Eleanor on their 30th anniversary, toasting with champagne on the porch. She rose, took the invitation down, and set it face down on the table. Then she picked up the anniversary photo, studied it closely, and placed it in a drawer. She didn't throw it away, but she didn't want to look at it anymore either. Later that evening, Gerald returned as usual, cheeks flushed from the walk. Went a little farther than usual, he said, toeing off his shoes. Grabbed a coffee near the library. Eleanor didn't look up from her knitting. Alone? He hesitated. Of course. She nodded. You always used to bring me back a lemon tart from there. He chuckled nervously. Forgot. Next time. She met his eyes. There won't be a next time, she said quietly. Gerald faltered. What does that mean? It means I know, Eleanor replied, and I'm giving you one chance. Just one. To tell me the truth. The room fell into a thick, choking silence. Gerald's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man who had just realized the door behind him had been locked from the inside. I don't know what you think you saw. Eleanor stood up, steady as stone. But you do, she said, and so does she. The next morning, the house felt like a church after a funeral. Silent, stripped of joy, every sound exaggerated. Eleanor moved through the kitchen like she had every day for the past 4 decades, but her hands no longer moved out of love. They moved because they had to, because routine was all she had left that didn't lie to her. Gerald hadn't slept in their bedroom. She'd heard the guest room door close after midnight. No excuses, no apologies, just silence. By dawn, Eleanor had made her decision. She wasn't going to beg for answers from a man who couldn't respect her enough to tell the truth. But she also wasn't going to pretend, not for David, not for the wedding, not to protect a house of cards. She picked up her phone and called Michelle. Sweetheart, she began, voice measured, would you mind stopping by the house sometime today? Just you. There's something I'd like to discuss before the wedding. Woman to woman. Michelle sounded confused but kind. Sure, Eleanor. Everything okay? Not yet, Eleanor replied. But it will be. She hung up before she could change her mind. 2 hours later, Michelle arrived, dressed in workout leggings and a soft pink hoodie, her face flushed with concern. Is something wrong with the wedding planning? Eleanor shook her head and gestured toward the sunroom, where they often sat for tea. She'd already placed the cups down, the lemon biscuits untouched. Michelle sat slowly. You're scaring me. I won't take much of your time, Eleanor said, but I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer from your gut. Not from politeness, not from fear of awkwardness. Michelle blinked. Okay. Eleanor leaned in slightly. Have you ever suspected your Aunt Lorraine was too close to my husband? Michelle's eyes widened. There was a pause, just long enough for the truth to slip out. I mean, she's always been a little flirty, Michelle said, clearly caught off guard. But that's just her way, right? She's like that with everyone. With everyone? Eleanor asked gently. Even married men 3 decades into a marriage. Michelle's face dropped. Wait, are you saying... I'm not saying anything I can't prove, Eleanor said. But I need you to know that something is happening, something inappropriate. I've seen it with my own eyes. Michelle sat back, stunned. She's your aunt, Michelle. I understand this is painful, but I would never bring this up if I wasn't certain. And more importantly, I need you to think about David. Michelle's voice cracked. He doesn't know, does he? Number not yet, Eleanor replied, but I'm giving you the choice. If you want me to stay quiet until after the wedding, I will. But you deserve to know the truth. So does he. Michelle buried her face in her hands, trembling. She's always been complicated, but I never imagined... Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over Michelle's. You don't have to protect her. Michelle looked up, eyes glassy. What do you want me to do? Eleanor's expression didn't waver. Invite her to the cookout this Saturday. Just say we're having a casual pre-wedding celebration. Your parents will be there, David's friends, the usual crowd, but make sure she's there. Michelle blinked. Why? Because, Eleanor said, standing up slowly, her voice low and firm. It's time for everyone to see who they really are. Michelle didn't respond at first, but then, slowly, she nodded. I'll handle the invitations. Eleanor gave a quiet, approving smile. Good girl. That night, Gerald tried to talk. He appeared in the doorway of the sunroom while Eleanor was reading, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor, we need to talk. She didn't look up. No, Gerald, you need to prepare. For what? She finally raised her eyes, calm and cold. For Saturday. It'll be a reunion, one you'll never forget. Gerald stared at her for a moment, then stepped back like a man who'd just realized the floor beneath him was cracking. As he left, Eleanor returned to her book, but she wasn't reading. Her eyes stayed on the same page as her mind rewrote every vow, every promise, every lie she had swallowed in the name of family. Saturday arrived cloaked in blue skies and birdsong, but Eleanor's heart beat like a war drum. Everything was prepared down to the smallest detail, the food, the seating, even the timing. But beneath the surface, nothing was what it seemed. This wasn't a celebration, it was a reckoning. David had helped set up the backyard again. Same picnic tables, same grill, same ivy-draped trellis. But this time, Eleanor had shifted the layout slightly. A new table sat under the oak tree, the one Gerald and Lorraine had whispered beneath just days earlier. She placed the desserts near it, set the drink cooler by it. Bait. Eleanor dressed in soft gray linen, calm and unassuming. Her silver hair was pinned in a loose twist, her earrings modest pearls. She wore no makeup, save for a stroke of colorless lip balm. Today wasn't about appearances. It was about truth. Guests trickled in slowly. David was his usual charming self, flipping burgers and cracking jokes with Michelle's father. Michelle, however, was quieter than usual, clinging to a glass of lemonade and glancing toward the gate every few minutes. And then Lorraine arrived. Fashionably late, of course. She swept into the yard in an off-shoulder white blouse and coral trousers, her hair pulled into a careless bun that somehow looked intentional. Her smile was too wide, her arms too open. She kissed Michelle on the cheek, hugged David, greeted Eleanor with a soft, You always host the best parties." And finally approached Gerald. Eleanor watched, noting the subtle way Gerald's back straightened at the sound of her voice. How Lorraine brushed something imaginary off his collar as they exchanged quiet words. They thought they were being discreet. They weren't. Eleanor didn't interrupt, not yet. She waited until everyone had settled, until the food was served and the drinks poured, and the backyard buzzed with laughter and summer chatter. Then she cleared her throat and clinked her glass. "Everyone," she said gently, standing beneath the trellis, "if I could just borrow your attention for a moment." The conversations died down. Heads turned. "First, I want to thank you all for coming. It means the world to see both sides of our families coming together like this, especially with such an exciting wedding around the corner." Cheers. Smiles. Gerald smiled too, tense and unsure. "But I've always believed family gatherings should be more than just polite conversation and potato salad," Eleanor continued. "They should also be about honesty, about seeing each other clearly." A murmur. Lorraine tilted her head slightly. Eleanor walked over to the small round table near the oak tree. On it sat a framed photo, a sealed envelope, and her wedding band, freshly removed that morning. "I've been married to Gerald for 43 years, she said, "and in that time, I've cooked thousands of meals, kissed away tears, raised a son, and built a life based on trust." She paused. "Or so I thought." Now silence settled in heavy and sharp. David looked up from his plate. Michelle froze mid-sip. Eleanor's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. "Because while I was making grocery lists and ironing shirts, my husband was sharing secrets, glances, and eventually, something more, with someone I barely knew." She turned, meeting Lorraine's eyes. "You!" Gasps. A stunned silence rippled across the backyard. Lorraine blinked, then let out a nervous laugh. "Eleanor, what are you talking about?" But Eleanor didn't falter. "I saw you together. By the tree. I saw your hand on him. I followed him to the cafe. I watched you meet in the shadows like teenagers." She stepped closer. "You've been disrespecting me, not just as a woman, but as family. You walked into my home, kissed my cheek, complimented my cobbler, all while hiding a knife behind your back." Gerald stood now, pale and stammering. "Eleanor, please. This isn't the time." "No, Gerald," she snapped. "The time was months ago. The time was when you could have told me the truth like a man. But instead, you chose to sneak around like a coward." David looked between them, speechless. Michelle's eyes brimmed with tears. "I didn't want to do this here," Eleanor said. "But sometimes truth demands a witness." She held up the envelope. "These are the cafe receipts, the phone records, the dates. And this," she tapped the framed photo, "is from the security camera outside the library cafe. The two of you, smiling, holding hands." Lorraine's face lost all color. Gerald turned, mouth opening, but no words came. Eleanor walked to the table, slipped off her wedding ring, and placed it beside the evidence. Then she turned to the guests. "I apologize for the interruption," she said softly, "but I will not sit across the table from liars. Not anymore." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked back into the house, leaving behind the echo of silence, broken trust, and a backyard full of wide-eyed witnesses. The screen door creaked shut behind Eleanor, but the backyard stayed suspended in shock. Conversations didn't resume. No one touched the cobbler. The sizzle of burgers on the grill had long gone silent. Michelle was the first to move. She set her glass down with shaking hands and turned to her aunt. "You said you were here for me," she whispered. "You said you wanted to help with the wedding, wanted to be part of this family." Lorraine straightened her shoulders, trying to regain her composure. "Michelle, But Michelle wasn't a child anymore. Don't insult me by pretending. I defended you to David, to Mom, said you were just misunderstood, that you were lonely, not calculating. And the whole time," her voice broke, and she quickly wiped her cheek. "You were sleeping with my future father-in-law?" Lorraine opened her mouth but closed it again. There was nothing to say, no way to spin it anymore. All eyes were on her, and on Gerald, who stood rigid, expression hollow, as though the walls of his carefully guarded double life had collapsed in one clean blow. Michelle turned toward David, who had remained frozen, shoulders tense like a man trying not to break in front of everyone. "Did you know?" she asked, voice trembling. David looked up sharply. "What?" "No, God, Michelle, of course not." "Then say something," she pleaded. "Say something, David." But what could he say? He turned to his father, the man who had once held him on his shoulders during summer fireworks, taught him how to fix a leaky sink, warned him never to lie to the woman he loved. "Is it true?" David's voice was barely audible. Gerald's lips moved, but again, no words. David's fists clenched at his sides. "You slept with her aunt, behind Mom's back, behind my back, and you planned to stand beside me at the altar like nothing happened?" "David, it wasn't," Gerald started, but his voice cracked under the weight of shame. "It wasn't what?" David's voice rose now, raw with hurt. "An affair? A betrayal? Or just a mistake you thought you could bury under picnic tables and polite smiles?" The tension in the air broke when Michelle's father stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Lorraine's shoulder. "You need to leave." Lorraine blinked in disbelief. I I didn't mean, "We invited you into our home," he said, his voice a cold wall. "Into our family. And you came here to poison it." Lorraine glanced around looking for support, but found only distance. No one would meet her eyes. With a choked breath, she turned and walked quickly toward the gate, heels crunching against the gravel, her grace shattered. Gerald stood there, stranded in the middle of the backyard, alone now. David turned to him one last time. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, "but you're not the man who raised me." And he walked away, following Michelle into the house. Guests began to leave quietly. Some gave Gerald sympathetic glances. Others didn't look back. He stood for a long time, staring at the empty picnic table under the oak tree, the same tree where it had all begun. Inside, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped, staring out the window. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply watched as the guests filed out, and the man she had once promised forever to stood alone. Michelle entered the room first, eyes red. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Eleanor looked up. "You have nothing to be sorry for, dear." "I should have seen it. I should have said something sooner." "No," Eleanor said gently. "You're not responsible for other people's choices." Michelle nodded, then hesitated. "Is the wedding off?" Eleanor didn't answer. She turned to David, who had just stepped in, his face pale, jaw tight. David looked from her to Michelle. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I need time." Michelle reached for his hand. Eleanor rose, brushing crumbs from the table. "You both deserve time," she said, "but whatever you decide, do it with your eyes open, not shut like mine were for years." David looked at her, his expression cracking. "Mom, I'm so sorry." She finally pulled him into her arms. For the first time since everything had unraveled, she allowed herself to hold someone who hadn't betrayed her. And for the first time in days, she exhaled. The cookout had ended hours ago, but the aftermath lingered like smoke in the air. Eleanor stood alone on the back porch, arms wrapped around herself despite the warm night breeze. From where she stood, she could still see the picnic table under the oak tree, empty now. Still, as though even the shadows didn't want to return. Inside, the house was quiet. David and Michelle had left together not long after the guests. He didn't say much, just kissed her cheek and whispered, "Thank you." It was all he could manage. Eleanor understood. Gerald was still in the guest room. She hadn't heard a sound from him since the incident. Not a word, not even a door creak. But Eleanor didn't go to him. She had nothing left to say. She took a slow breath and turned back inside. There was no more pretending. No more waiting for apologies that would never come or explanations that would never make sense. All that remained now was choice. Heron, she sat down in the living room with a yellow legal pad in front of her and began writing. She wrote down every bank account, every property, every asset, everything she and Gerald had built together. Then she drew a line right through the center of the page and wrote one word: divided. There had been a time when the thought of divorce would have devastated her, when it would have felt like a personal failure. But now it felt like freedom. She had kept that marriage alive through grief, disappointment, and betrayal, but she would not keep it alive through humiliation. Her pen paused only once, when she reached the section titled Family Heirlooms. The diamond necklace from Gerald's grandmother, the anniversary ring, the cedar chest filled with photo albums. Eleanor circled the word photos, then drew a box around it. She would keep the memories but not the myth. Later that night, a soft knock came at the kitchen doorway. She looked up to see Gerald, his face drawn, eyes sunken. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in a single day. "Eleanor," he said, voice rough, "can we talk?" She gestured toward the table, but didn't speak. He sat fidgeting with his fingers. "I messed up. I know I did. And I know there's no excuse." She didn't respond. "I never meant for it to go that far. I thought I don't know. I thought I was still someone who could feel wanted." That struck something in her, but not sympathy, clarity. "That's what I was," Eleanor said softly. "Your mirror, your nurse, your cook, your sounding board. For decades, I made you feel wanted. But when I needed that from you, when I needed to be seen, you looked past me." He bowed his head. "It wasn't love. It wasn't even real. It was a distraction." "I know," she replied, and that more than anything, told her how far gone he was. Because even in his apology, he wasn't apologizing for hurting her. He was apologizing for being foolish. "Lorraine wasn't your first, was she?" Eleanor asked suddenly. He looked up, startled. "What? You didn't even flinch when I confronted you. You didn't deny it. That kind of silence doesn't come from first-time guilt. It comes from routine." He hesitated. That was all the answer she needed. She nodded slowly, more tired than angry now. "You wore me down, Gerald. Not just this year. Not just with Lorraine. But every time you dismissed me, every time I swallowed something bitter to keep peace for David. I built this life. I built this family. And you set fire to it." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'll move out," he whispered. "Tomorrow." Eleanor stood. "No," she said. "You'll leave tonight." He looked up, stunned. "Where will I go?" "I don't care," she replied. "You lost the right to ask me for comfort." Gerald stood, nodding numbly, as if the words had hit harder than a slap. Eleanor walked him to the door and handed him his coat. She didn't wait to see if he turned back. She simply shut the door after him, not with force, not in fury, just finality. As she locked it behind her, she whispered, 43 years too late, and then she turned off the porch light. A week passed. The phone rang. The neighbors whispered. David called twice a day. Michelle dropped off flowers. And yet, through it all, Eleanor never once let the silence get to her. Because for the first time in decades, it was her silence. Not the silence of being overlooked, ignored, or dismissed, but the kind that comes after a storm has passed and the air is finally clear. She spent her mornings reading in the sunroom with no footsteps above her. Her afternoons were quiet walks to the library without checking the time. And in the evenings, she listened to old records, dusty, sentimental songs that once sounded like background noise to a marriage. Now they sounded like freedom. There were still moments when it hit her. A smell, a sweater folded in the linen closet, a crack in the porch steps she used to remind Gerald to fix. But instead of spiraling into grief, Eleanor simply acknowledged it, then let it go. She didn't erase him from her life. She just no longer made room for him in it. The legal process had begun. She had met with her attorney and laid everything out clearly. No bitterness, just boundaries. When the lawyer asked if she wanted to request spousal support, she shook her head. "I don't want his money," she said. "I just want what I earned. And peace." Word had spread through their small community. Friends from church reached out in hushed tones. Some expressed shock. Others quietly confessed they'd always sensed something was wrong beneath Gerald's charm. But Eleanor didn't gossip. She didn't fuel it. She didn't need to. She had already said everything she needed to say on that summer afternoon beneath the oak tree, with half the family watching. And that truth echoed louder than any rumor ever could. One afternoon, as she pruned the rose bushes in the backyard, Michelle arrived. Her eyes were clearer now, less frantic. "Can I help?" she asked. Eleanor handed her a pair of gloves. For a while they worked in silence, clipping back thorny stems, gathering wilted petals. Finally, Michelle spoke. "David told me he called off the wedding." Eleanor paused but didn't look up. I'm sorry, Michelle added. I know how much you wanted to see him happy. Eleanor stood slowly, brushing soil from her knees. I wanted to see him whole, not pretending, not building his future on broken ground. Michelle's voice softened. He said your strength gave him clarity. Eleanor turned, her gaze gentle but firm. Strength isn't about anger, Michelle. It's about knowing what you won't allow twice. Michelle nodded. I hope I have that kind of strength someday. You do, Eleanor said. You showed it when you stayed, when you faced it with me. Michelle blinked, holding back tears. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think people ever really change? Eleanor looked at the blooming roses, scarlet and pink, bold against the summer sky. Not always, she said, but they can choose to. That's the difference. Michelle smiled faintly. You should keep the house. Eleanor raised a brow. Why's that? Because it's already survived a betrayal, and now it deserves to witness healing. Eleanor smiled, a slow, sad smile. Then I guess I better paint the guest room, make space for something new. They stood together in the sunlight, hands stained with earth, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt her heart begin to breathe again. Not because everything was fixed, but because she had finally stopped fixing everything that wasn't hers to hold. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings and golden leaves, and Eleanor found herself at peace. Not because her life was perfect, but because it was honest. The truth had scorched everything false, and what remained was real. She donated Gerald's things, repainted the guest room a soft lavender, enrolled in a watercolor class. On Sundays, she walked past the cafe where the affair began. Head high, no hesitation. One afternoon, she received a letter. It was from Gerald, handwritten, regretful, full of apologies and memories. He ended with, I lost you before I even realized you were leaving. She folded it once and placed it in a drawer. Not out of bitterness, but closure. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, she sat on the back porch with a cup of tea. The oak tree swayed gently in the breeze. Beneath it, nothing hidden, nothing whispered. Eleanor smiled, not because she'd won, but because she'd walked away whole. And this time she chose herself.